Making media is significantly harder than people think. There are thousands of little components and decisions being made in creating a story, and seemingly small mistakes in these can be the difference between a piece of media feeling amateur and professional. So when Gigguk, one of the foundational anime video essayists on YouTube, announced he was making his own anime, there were a couple questions that immediately came up. The biggest one being, is it gonna be any good? Welcome to this week's video. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about when someone goes from analyzing media to making it. So this last Saturday, September 20th, 2025, Gigguk released his first anime project, a short film titled Bon. Whenever a creator releases an arts project, there's a question that gets answered within the first couple minutes of consuming it. Are we going to be holding this to a professional standard or an amateur one? When a friend shows you a project from their film school, you tend to consume it through a grain of salt, not comparing it to Hollywood projects, but looking more at whether or not they show potential. And for me, Gigguk's anime holds up to that standard, which also means we'll be criticizing it based on that standard. So to answer that question, was Gigguk's story any good? Was it a success? Yes, I think so, with a very clear asterisk. So let's break it up into three major categories for today. Was this story successful critically, financially, and personally? So starting first with critical success, which can mean lots of different things. We're going to simplify it to two categories, online reviews and my own critical perspective. Right now on my anime list, after 20,000 user reviews, Bon is rated 7.42. I think that this is actually pretty accurate, which shocks me because whenever an online creator gets into a new medium, reviews will be heavily influenced by fans and haters who will oversimplify the goods and bads, trying to compensate for one another. Because of his online presence, people who find Gigguk frustrating will hate this piece of media no matter what, and superfans will love it because they want to see someone they care about succeed. So these quantitative results kind of matching up with my own perceptions surprised me. But what if we move to a more qualitative side? I asked my audience what they thought of this story, and tons of people gave their own perspectives. There was a lot of praise and some pretty reasonable criticism. One comment says, it seems like too much story and too little runtime. We catch interesting glimpses of potential without enough background to make it solid. This seems to be a recurring take. Like this comment, which echoes the same point while also praising the creative passion. This kind of nuance, praising certain components and criticizing others in soft ways, is kind of the main feedback I saw. It makes sense that one of the most substantial challenges to making a compelling, engaging short story is one that Gigguk found himself struggling with. How do you tell a truly compelling story in a very limited amount of time? One that's engaging, surprising, and standalone. Which leads to my perspective. I think Bon as a story was predominantly made up of solid but not outstanding components, with a couple exceptions, both positive and negative. I found myself very surprised how, despite its shortcomings, Bon was incredibly emotionally resonant for me. I think it was built around a very specific theme and it explored it well. So the biggest positives for me with this project were the way different components came together to evoke an emotional response, telling a story built around a theme that has some real substance behind it. For me, the strongest individual component of this story was its score. Not only was the music outstanding, it was used to great effect. Now, the inverse of this was the world building, which I think was very strong but used much less effectively, and in some ways kind of undermined the tone of the story. Which leads to my main criticism, the story's lack of compelling conflict, which was greatly exaggerated and worsened by audience expectations. I think Bon's introduction overpromises its premise. In the pursuit of creating a fantastic world, the audience isn't properly indicated to what type of story this is going to be. Isekai are often filled with high stakes, action, and magic, but Bon, with one exception in a flashback, doesn't engage with those stakes almost at all. In retrospect, it's a story that's a coming-of-age slice of life, with only implied bigger stakes. Brandon Sanderson, a established fantasy author and pronounced educator when it comes to writing, argues that you make a promise in the beginning of a story. It's why a vast majority of fantasy novels have prefaces or intro chapters that start with grand magical battles. Eragon, for example, has a preface that starts with an elf fighting a monster in pursuit of protecting this dragon's egg before teleporting it away. It sets the tone for what the story will eventually become. It lets readers know that when for the next couple chapters we follow a farmhand living in an unspectacular city, that's setting up for something bigger, a grand adventure with magic and monsters and fights. Bon's story kind of does the inverse, promising a bigger story than it ends up being. And there's room for subversion like this in other forms of media, but in short form, it's really hard to make something like that work. Okay, so we're at the spoiler warning part. I imagine a lot of you have already seen Bond before watching this video, but if you haven't, just be warned. Spoilers. So this story begins with both Rin and Daichi taking this leap of faith, transporting to their opposite worlds. To create stakes, Daichi's mother worries for him, noting that the zone he's going to is more dangerous. There's this magical dragon that Rin feels close to. All of these seem to indicate a grander story. None of these components have to be cut. You can tell a slice of life in a magical world. But when the audience is trying to set their expectations, leaning on these components too heavily in the beginning can misguide viewers. So zooming back for a second, the thing I think that this story did exceptionally well was be emotionally resonant. I found myself incredibly surprised by the twist. The reveal, in my opinion, worked very well. And not once, but twice, I found myself tearing up while watching this 18-minute short film, which I think is very impressive. However, my main criticism is that this story didn't have a lot of compelling conflict. There are two kind of major climaxes in the story, and the bigger of the two is built around this flashback, where we find out that Rin lost both of her parents and Daichi took on the responsibility of caring for her. That's her main motive as a character, trying not to feel like a burden, taking this leap of faith to go support herself in Japan. This story very eloquently explores that feeling of venturing out for the first time as a young adult on your own, trying to support yourself and persevering through tons of those struggles that come with taking care of yourself. I think it's a really powerful theme that's captured pretty beautifully in this story, especially in the ending with Rin coming home to Daichi's cooking. But holding an audience attention is like constantly fighting friction. People are looking for reasons to click away. And one of the main ways to keep an audience engaged is through conflict. By the time we understand what Rin's goals are or why it was so important for her to be able to take care of herself, most of her struggles are overcome in a short montage. It's not that low conflict feel-good stories don't have a place in media, it's just setting them up in this kind of isekai world can lead to a mismatch in expectations. Something this project demonstrates really beautifully is just how expensive making anime is. A loose estimate of hundreds of thousands of dollars and deep connections to make less than a single episode of anime. The reason I say this is not to diminish at all the effort, passion, or expenses that went into creating this project, just to highlight how impressive good anime is. Making any anime is incredibly expensive, time-consuming, requires tons of collaborators, and is a challenge that has so many moving components that none of us can really account for. This project from the get-go set out to not be financially successful. And that demonstrates, in my opinion, something actually really cool about this specific project and Gigguk's passion. Something that I've seen a lot of discourse online about, that I've talked a lot to my roommate in the past, is this idea that a lot of people are breaking into mainstream media as content creators with the intention of making a quick buck. I've had the opportunity to work as a professional musician with some pretty big Twitch streamers, and in most cases, my experience has been passion-based. But things like the Mr. Beast burger probably isn't a byproduct of overwhelming passion for culinary institutes. It demonstrates that Gigguk is willing to spend huge sums of money and take big risks at potentially losing it all, maybe in the best case scenario going even, to create and release an anime on YouTube. I think that is a testament to the way he feels about what he's doing. This is obviously a passion project, a venture into creation, which leads to kind of this third question. Was this a personal success? I have a deep respect for the fact that Gigguk is trying to engage in what I would argue to be one of the most difficult mediums to break into. What he and his collaborators have done with this project is an immense achievement. It's a very vulnerable thing to try to create an authentic piece of art without hiding behind humor or irony. Based off of the clips I've been able to see of Gigguk talking about this entire experience, I think this is obviously a personal success. But I think that extends beyond just him. There's a very realistic chance without Gigguk's channel that I'm not making the content I am today. I've consistently consumed his content for a long time now. I love a variety of different video essay channels, but he was always the one I paid most attention to when it came to anime. His decisions involving content, both as a YouTuber and as someone trying to venture outside of that, have impact. And on the odd chance that he sees this video, Garnt, you should be very proud. Setting out to take on such a challenging project and finishing it is an achievement itself. Making something that I argued to be good, not great, is a big deal. People get stuck in these feedback loops of perfection. And no matter how hard you try, or anyone really tries, there are going to be people that don't enjoy the piece of content they create. But you and I have both built a career off of admiring things that move us. And I think your influence, and I hope mine, encourages people to connect with that part of themselves, and hopefully to grow and continue to have these positive cascading effects on the world. What I'm saying is absolutely melodramatic, but I do stand by it. The world can be difficult and making stuff can be just as hard. But that's part of what makes it so worth it.